The first thing you notice, before you even understand where you are, is the cold. Not the playful kind of cold that nips at your fingers on a winter morning, but a heavy, ancient cold that sinks into your bones as soon as you breathe. A cold so sharp that the air itself feels fragile, as though it might shatter if you inhale too quickly. And as you stand there in the dimming light of a Wild West dusk, you understand with a quiet certainty that the countless men and women who crossed these plains were not only fighting hunger, storms, or loneliness, but fighting night itself, because once the sun slipped behind the horizon and the blue shadows stretched across the prairie, the world transformed into something raw and enormous, and sleep became not a gentle act but a negotiation with the darkness. You find yourself walking slowly beneath a sky swelling with snow clouds, each gust of wind brushing icy crystals across your cheeks, the faint crunch of frozen earth under your boots echoing far louder than it should in this vast, empty land. And as you take in the silence, you realize it is not silence at all, but a kind of living stillness, a breath held by the world before the storm arrives. A reminder that in the Wild West winter was not simply weather but a presence, a companion that settled around cabins and wagons and sleeping forms like an unseen animal, waiting patiently at their doors. You step toward a small cabin, rough-hewn, hurriedly built, its logs still slick with the sap of trees cut only days before, and as you enter, warmth touches your face for just a moment before you understand that the fire on the hearth is no more than a flickering illusion of comfort, because inside it is scarcely warmer than outside, the cold creeping in through every gap stuffed with moss or mud, and the air smells of smoke, damp wool, and something faintly sour. The lingering scent of tallow and leather grease used to keep boots from stiffening in the frost. The family inside nods to you quietly, not surprised to see another wanderer seeking shelter from a night that promises to freeze anything left unguarded. And you watch as they tug buffalo hides across their small bed, thick, heavy, coarse blankets that were traded across the plains, and cherished not for beauty but for survival. And each movement they make reminds you of how fragile warmth is out here, how quickly the cold claims any space too slow to defend itself. You move closer to the hearth, feeling the fire lick faint warmth across your hands, but when you turn away, you sense frost already gathering on the inside of the cabin walls, delicate white crystals crawling silently over the logs, as though the night is reaching inward. And you understand why settlers sometimes woke with their blankets frozen to the boards, breath turned to brittle lace above their heads while they slept. You sit on the rough plank bed, its straw-filled mattress crackling beneath you, the dry scent of last summer's grass rising faintly as the stalks shift. And whether the itch against your skin is from the straw or simply from the cold you cannot tell, but you lie down anyway, pulling the hide across your shoulders and listening to the wind sneaking through whatever crack your eyes cannot see. And when you close your own eyes, you feel the cabin creaking softly the way old wood does when snow begins to weigh down on the roof, each sound blending slowly into the rhythm of sleep. And before sleep fully takes you, you understand one final truth. People did not sleep in the Wild West winter because it was comfortable. They slept because they had to, because tomorrow required strength, and night was the only place to borrow it. The first night is always the hardest, or so the old pioneers used to say, and as you lie beneath the heavy buffalo hide, you feel the weight of that truth pressing down on your chest like another layer of winter, because although the fire burns a few feet away, you can sense the cold creeping around the warm circle of light, in the same way wolves circle a camp, patient and deliberate, choosing not to pounce but simply to wait for the right moment. And you begin to understand why so many frontier diaries speak of nights spent half awake, ears tuned to the wind, bodies curled tight as fiddle strings, sleep arriving not as a gentle drifting but in brief fragile waves. You inhale slowly, and the air feels stiff in your lungs, as though it has forgotten how to move, carrying with it the sharp tang of smoke that clings to your clothes, your hair, even your skin, and you imagine the countless families who breathed this same mix of fire and frost night after night, coughing quietly into quilts patched from old dresses and shirts, whispering small prayers that the embers would last until dawn. The walls shift again, one quiet creak, like the cabin exhaling, and you feel a strange comfort in it, because even though the sound reminds you how thin these logs are, and how hurriedly they were stacked, it also feels like the house is alive, awake with you, watching the storm together as if the two of you share a secret pact. You will stay still and breathe softly, and it will stand strong until morning, both of you holding on in your own ways. Your eyes begin to close, heavy with the slow thaw of warmth gathering beneath the hides, and as you drift towards sleep you feel the faintest dusting of cold against your cheek, a tiny draft sneaking through the chinked logs, and instead of fighting it, you simply tuck yourself deeper into the small universe of quilts and fur you've been given, understanding at last that surviving the Wild West winter is not about conquering the cold, but about learning how to coexist with it, surrendering just enough to let sleep take you without allowing the night to swallow you whole. And so, wrapped in hides that still smell faintly of the animal they once covered, lulled by the creaking breath of the cabin, you let yourself slip into the quiet, half-dreaming state that passed for rest on the frontier, knowing that morning will come, and with it another day, another fire, another chance to borrow warmth from the wilderness. The smell of resin hangs in the air, fresh sap still weeping from logs cut too green, and each time the cabin pops a faint sweetness rises, mingling with the heavier scents of smoke, wool, leather, and damp straw, so that the whole room feels like some strange mixture of forest and hearth, a place that is neither fully wild nor fully tamed, but hovering somewhere in between, just like the people trying to sleep inside it. The sounds never really stop. Even when the wind outside pauses to catch its breath, the house continues its own quiet conversation, joints settling, rafters flexing under the weight of snow, floorboards creaking as someone shifts in their sleep or sneaks another log onto the embers. And after a while, when you lie there for long enough, you begin to recognize each noise as if it belongs to a particular character. The sharp crack near the door, the long groan along the roof beam, the soft ticking of cooling iron, making it a little easier to close your eyes because it feels less like the building is failing and more like it is simply alive. You stretch your toes against the rough tick and feel the straw move like dry bones beneath you, a faint rustle that answers your smallest gesture. And instead of resenting it, you start to accept that this is part of the lullaby of the frontier night, not a nuisance to be eliminated, but a texture of sound and sensation that accompanies every attempt at rest. The itch on your calf, the cold patch near your shoulder where the robe has slipped, the distant thump of wind-borne snow against the wall, each one is another stitch in the great heavy quilt of the dark. After days and weeks of such nights, something subtle begins to happen inside the mind, something that journals hint at without always naming directly. The body never grows entirely comfortable, but it does grow accustomed, and the cold that once felt like a personal insult becomes a constant like gravity, an expected weight that you no longer argue with, so that when you lie down you are not hoping for perfect warmth or silence, only for a few hours in which the discomfort does not increase, in which the cabin holds, the fire lives, and the wolves keep to their distant hills. You notice that your sense of time shifts too. Without clocks glowing on bedside tables or streetlights leaking through curtains, night is measured in more primitive ways. The length of a log's burn, the number of times someone rises to stoke the fire, the slow drift of frost along the rafters, and sleep comes in segments, in stretches that feel longer or shorter depending on how often the wind screams or the baby cries, until historians looking back will argue about whether people spoke of a first sleep and second sleep because they truly followed such patterns, or because their exhaustion fractured naturally into whatever pieces the night allowed. There is a quiet moment, usually in the deep center of the dark when the fire has burned down to a bed of red glowing coals and the storm outside, if there is one, retreats to a low steady murmur, when you wake for no clear reason, and simply lie there listening, your body neither cold nor warm, neither fully tired nor fully alert. And in that in-between space, the cabin feels like a ship drifting on a black sea of snow, carried by forces you cannot see, and you sense why so many frontier letters speak of thoughts that came to them only at such hours, fears about crops and debts, memories of green fields and distant homes, prayers murmured silently so as not to disturb the sleepers pressed against them. Sometimes in those hours someone will whisper just a few words across the pillow, and the reply will come just as soft. Because while people on the frontier rarely spoke of tenderness openly, their closeness at night betrayed it. A hand reaching under the quilt to check whether a child's feet are still warm, a small shift of the shoulders to give another body more space, a quiet apology for an elbow or a kick, and in these almost invisible gestures you can see how sleep in the Wild West winters was not merely a private matter, but a communal act, a nightly reaffirmation that survival depended on the group as much as on the individual. On other nights, the cabin is not full of family, but of hired men or drifters, wintering in exchange for labor, and the shared bed becomes less intimate and more practical. A line of bodies arranged according to height or strength, the biggest nearest the drafty wall, the smallest huddled in the center, and you lie there aware that you barely know the person breathing inches from your face. Yet the warmth that radiates from him is as necessary as any blanket, blurring the line between stranger and companion until morning, when everyone rises, ties their boots, and goes back to speaking with the distance that daylight demands. The rhythm repeats itself night after night, and gradually the harshness of it acquires a strange familiarity. You know exactly how long it will take for your toes to thaw around a warmed stone, how many breaths you can take before the smoke begins to sting, how to angle your body, so the worst of the draft slides past your neck, instead of into it, and in this accumulation of tiny adjustments, you can see how frontier people built their sleep in layers, not just of hides and quilts, but of habits, tricks, and small bits of borrowed wisdom, some from books, some from neighbors, and many from the indigenous people who had already survived countless winters on these lands. Every now and then, when the night is unusually still and the logs are quiet, you can hear something beyond the house, a distant sleigh passing over hard-packed snow, the soft jingle of harness, perhaps a low voice singing to keep the driver awake, or the faraway echo of a coyote's yip out on the ridges, thinner and sharper than a wolf's morning call. And these sounds draw a faint invisible line between your fragile shelter and the vast prairie around it, reminding you that while you lie in the dark struggling to sleep, an entire landscape is continuing its own slow, indifferent life just beyond the lamplight. You might think that such conditions would leave people bitter and resentful, but many accounts tell a different, more complicated story. Yes, they cursed the drafts and the leaking roofs and the smoke that made their eyes water, yet in the same breath they remembered with a kind of aching fondness the winter nights when the whole household lay piled together like a single creature, breath rising as one into the freezing air, frost glittering overhead like stars they could almost reach, and the knowledge that for this one night at least, everyone they loved was under the same roof, wrapped in the same patchwork of cloth, fur, and hope. And so, as you lie there in the Wild West dark, listening to the cabin creak and settle and sigh, feeling the straw prick your skin and the buffalo hide, slowly gather your body heat into a small pocket of almost warmth, you begin to understand that sleeping through these brutal winters was never about finding comfort in the way you might imagine it today. It was about accepting a certain level of discomfort as the background of life and learning to rest anyway, to drift half awake through the long hours while trusting that the fire would be tended, the roof would hold, and the cold, however relentless, would not quite manage to take what lay breathing beneath the quilts. Your thoughts grow slower, your muscles loosen one by one, and the creaks of the cabin fade into a distant murmur, as if coming from another world. Your last clear sensation is the weight of another shoulder against yours, and the faint tick of cooling sap in the logs, and then you let go for a while, slipping down into the kind of sleep that is not deep or luxurious but sufficient. the kind that people in the Wild West learned to treasure, because in the morning, when the door is opened and the first icy light pours in, there will be wood to chop, animals to feed, and another long, cold night waiting on the other side of dusk. You surface from sleep slowly, the way a body does when it has not rested fully but simply drifted in and out of warmth. And for a moment you are unsure whether the faint trembling beneath you is your own shiver or the subtle shifting of the cabin itself, as it meets another wave of pre-dawn cold pressing against its walls. The darkness has changed. It is no longer the thick velvety black of midnight, but a thinner, bluer shade that suggests the world outside is beginning to stir beneath the weight of frost. And though your eyes are still half shut, you can feel the room around you waking in its own quiet, reluctant way. Someone nearby coughs, a deep, wet sound that rattles through the blankets, and another sleeper mumbles, adjusting their position, tugging the buffalo hide closer, as if bargaining with the last few minutes before morning demands its due. You inhale through the scratchy wool near your chin, and the smell of smoke is softer now, less frantic, as though the fire too has grown weary from burning all night. Nothing left but a bed of faintly glowing embers that pulse like a tired heartbeat in the dimness. The air has turned sharper, stinging the inside of your nose, and as you shift slightly, the quilt crinkles with a thin layer of frost that must have settled there while you slept, a delicate film of ice that cracks quietly against your movement. Frontier diaries often mention such mornings, waking in cabins so cold that breath froze on blankets, hair stiffened at the roots, and even clothing left too near the wall became rigid with ice by dawn. And as you stretch your fingers, you feel that peculiar numbness that is not quite pain but a warning that warmth must return soon. You listen, letting the room reveal itself piece by piece. The logs no longer creak with the urgency of night storms but sigh with the fatigue of a structure that has done its job, and the wind outside brushes softly against the roof like a giant animal testing the den it failed to break during the night. Beneath the hides, the subtle warmth of shared bodies lingers, fading slowly but still enough to anchor you in this fragile cocoon, and you understand why so many settlers spoke of dawn with a mixture of dread and gratitude, because the cold at sunrise was often the most brutal, gratitude because dawn at least promised survival. You shift again and feel the straw beneath you respond with a dry rustle, releasing its faint smell of old fields, and for a moment you lie still, letting that scent blend with the smoke and the musk of hides, creating the peculiar perfume of a frontier morning, a smell that countless letters captured with a kind of weary affection, because even though it meant another day of hardship, it also meant that the long night was over. Somewhere to your right a child stirs, whimpering softly as cold touches their face, and you hear the comforting rumble of a parent's voice murmuring a reassurance, the words indistinct but tender, and the child settles again, burying their cheek against a warm shoulder. These quiet moments were rarely recorded in journals, yet you know they must have happened thousands of times across thousands of winter mornings, tiny gestures of care that threaded families together, long before breakfast fires were built or chores resumed. Then the first real movement of the day shakes the room. Someone pulls themselves upright, boots thudding onto the floor, as they brace for the shock of cold wood. You can almost feel it through them, the way the air clamps onto exposed skin like a set of icy teeth, and for a heartbeat nobody else moves. Each person silently hoping that perhaps today they will not be the one chosen to coax the fire back to life. But duty is heavier than quilts, and the figure trudges to the hearth, poking into the bed of ash until a faint orange spark leaps upward, a tiny spark that means hope, warmth, breakfast, survival. The soft clang of the poker echoes in the quiet, and you hear the familiar hiss as a log is placed gently onto the embers, its bark snapping as heat tries to claim it. You can smell the change immediately. The first thin threads of smoke rise warm and sharp, pulling the room back from the edge of cold, and as the flame begins to take shape, casting the faintest glow across quilts, faces, boots, and frost-laced rafters, You feel the same release that frontier families must have felt every single morning. The recognition that winter has not won yet, that another day is possible, that warmth, however small, is returning. You exhale slowly, sinking deeper into the bedding for one last moment, letting your breath rise as a soft cloud above you, and as it freezes in the air you watch it drift upward like a tiny ghost, joining the fading constellation of frost that survived the night. And somewhere in that quiet rise of warmth and cold, in the soft glow of a rekindled fire, you understand why people kept going. Night after night, winter after winter, not because they were fearless and not because they were comfortable, but because dawn always came, even if it arrived in tiny degrees, in cracking embers, in breath turning to ice, in the slow awakening of a cabin held together by hope, rope, sap, and stubbornness. When the fire finally catches, a soft whoosh of breath as the new log accepts the embers, you feel the entire cabin ease, not visibly, not dramatically, but in a subtle collective exhale, as though every sleeper's body has been waiting for that small miracle before surrendering fully to morning. The glow spreads slowly, rolling across rough-hewn walls and straw-filled ticks, and bit by bit the room shifts from a shivering nest of shadows into something resembling a home again, each flicker of flame coaxing warmth back into the frozen air. You can hear more movement now. Someone rolls over with a groan, joints cracking like old branches, and another person sits up too quickly, sucking in a sharp breath as the cold rushes beneath their blankets. Children burrow deeper into quilts, attempting those last precious seconds of warmth, their small forms wriggling like animals reluctant to leave a burrow. A baby fusses, probably sensing the temperature change, and a parent hushes them with muffled shushing sounds, their breath puffing out in white tufts that drift upward like feathers of steam. It is at this time of morning that frontier diaries often shift in tone, no longer describing the creaking walls or the prowling wolves or the restless night, but the tired, practical calculations that begin the day. How much firewood is left? How quickly will the snow melt in the pot on the stove? How many days until the next supply run, assuming the drifts ever allow it? You feel those questions settle around your own mind now, heavy but familiar, the way a long winter forces everyone into the rhythm of survival. A kettle is placed on the iron grate above the strengthening flames, and you hear the first soft hiss of melting snow inside it, a sound that carries more promise than any bird song could in this season. There is something deeply calming about it, the transformation of ice into water, the slow assurance that soon there will be steam warming the air, and perhaps even the comfort of a hot drink to coax numb fingers back to life. You pull your own coverings aside just enough to peek at the world beyond your feet, and the chill bites immediately at your skin, sharp and unforgiving. The buffalo hide shifts heavily, dropping a small cascade of frost crystals onto the floor where they vanish almost instantly near the edge of the hearth's growing warmth. It's a scene described again and again in the letters of settlers, mornings when frost fell indoors like snow, a gentle reminder that walls were merely suggestions here, not barriers. Someone moves toward the small window, a panel patched with oiled paper rather than glass, and scrapes away a thin crust of frost with their sleeve. Light filters through, weak and pale but real, and the paper glows with a tired golden hue. Outside, the world appears blurred and silent, snow piled high, tree branches sagging under its weight, the horizon washed in icy blue. Even the sky looks reluctant to wake. You finally sit up, your back protesting as cold air pours down your neck. The straw beneath you shifts noisily, releasing its dry scent, and you brush a piece of it away from your sleeve, watching as it floats lazily to the floor. There is something grounding about this moment. The familiar rustle, the faint smell, the realization that even in discomfort there is routine. Around you, others begin bundling themselves into day-worn layers, wool shirts still stiff with smoke, trousers patched so many times the original fabric is barely visible, thick socks hung overnight by the fire, but still faintly damp from the previous day's snow. Nobody speaks much. Mornings are quiet affairs, shaped by tired bodies and the need to conserve breath. But the silence is not unfriendly, it's simply practical. Then comes the universal frontier ritual, the slow, reluctant emergence from warmth. One by one people rise, blankets falling away, each person making a sound somewhere between a gasp and a grunt as the cold clamps onto their skin. You feel it too, a full-body shiver that runs from your scalp to your toes, and for a moment you hesitate, hovering on the edge of your bedding like a swimmer bracing for winter water. But then you stand, because you must. Everyone must. Survival in winter is not patient. It demands movement. Your feet hit the floor and instantly regret it. The wooden planks are so cold they seem to pulse with their own quiet pain, and you curl your toes against it, instinctively. Moccasins or boots cannot be pulled on fast enough. You fumble with the laces, fingers stiff, breath fogging as you mutter a quiet complaint, something countless settlers must have whispered at the exact same moment each day. When you finally stagger toward the fire, the warmth touches your shins in hesitant waves, and you lean closer, letting the heat wash against your face until the sting in your cheeks fades. A pot is set over the coals, its lid rattling softly as steam gathers, and the first smell of something warm, broth, porridge, or simply melted snow, begins to curl upward through the room. Outside, the wind shifts, brushing snow from the eaves in a delicate whisper, and for the first time since waking you realize that the world, despite its harshness, has quieted. The storm has passed. The cold remains, deep and immovable. But for now the prairie seems peaceful, the horizon softened beneath a smooth white veil. Inside the cabin, boots thud softly, quilts are folded, and someone hums a faint tune, low, weary but hopeful, as the walls continue to sigh in their familiar winter language. And in this moment, hazy with smoke and first light, you understand something small but profound. Survival in the Wild West wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about finding tenderness within it. In a warmed stone, a shared quilt, a rekindled fire, a quiet morning breath. You move closer to the window, still wrapped in the lingering warmth of the fire, and as the pale light strengthens behind the oiled paper, you begin to notice shapes beyond it. Soft, rounded silhouettes, where the snow has drifted high against the cabin walls, the delicate arches formed by wind-curling powder into sculpted ridges, the distant shadows of fence posts half buried and leaning like tired sentinels who have endured the long night alongside you. The world has transformed into a landscape of silence, every sound swallowed before it can find its voice, and for a moment it feels as if nothing exists outside this fragile shelter, except miles of cold and calm. When someone finally unlatches the door, a slow, deliberate movement that seems to echo through the room, you sense the collective bracing of everyone inside. Even the fire appears to flicker in anticipation. The wooden plank groans as it swings outward, and a blade of white light cuts through the dimness, spilling across the floor in a cold silver strip. Then the true morning air rushes in, sharp as broken glass, sweeping over your face and arms with such intensity that it steals your breath before you can catch it. It is a shock every time. No matter how many winters settlers endured, no matter how prepared they believed themselves to be, every diary agrees on one thing: stepping outside at dawn was like facing a new world entirely, brutal but mesmerizing, a place that asked nothing and offered nothing except the truth of its own vastness. You step out slowly, boots sinking into snow that crunches like powdered stone beneath your weight, the surface glittering with the delicate sparkle of frost catching the newborn sun. The cabin behind you seems smaller now, a dark rectangle tucked against the immensity of the plains, its logs steaming faintly where warm air escapes through its seams. A thin line of smoke rises from the chimney, curling upward into a sky so clear and bright it hurts to look at. The pale blue horizon stretched wide like an endless sheet of cold iron. Your breath drifts out in thick white clouds, layering the air with little ghosts of warmth that dissolve almost instantly. The cold wraps around your arms and chest like a second skin, not hostile but overwhelming. and you understand why frontier families hurried through their morning tasks with a quiet intensity. Even simple chores seemed monumental in such temperatures: gathering firewood, checking the frozen water buckets, seeing whether last night's storm had buried the path to the barn or snapped the fencing that kept livestock from wandering in the dark. You begin to notice small details now: the faint tracks of a rabbit leading toward a thicket of brush, the fragile ribs of ice clinging to the edges of the well, the way the sun turns every surface into a blinding sheet of white gold. The stillness is immense, and yet it is not empty. You hear the faint groan of snow sliding from a branch, the distant crack of ice expanding in a creek bed far across the plain, even the tiny whisper of wind sweeping powder into new drifts, reshaping the landscape moment by moment. Then you turn toward the barn. Its roof is bowed with the weight of snow, and the door is frozen at the edges, the wood stiff with frost. You tug it gently and feel the resistance of ice clinging like stubborn fingers. A second pull, stronger this time, breaks it free, and when you step inside, the dimness is thick, warm, almost comforting. The smell of livestock hits you immediately: hay, manure, and the soft musk of sleeping animals. And for a moment it feels like stepping into another world entirely, a world where breath and heartbeat still matter more than the cold beyond the walls. Horses snort softly as you approach, their manes rimmed with frost where breath has settled overnight. A cow shifts on its feet, weary but alive, steam rising from its flank in slow, gentle waves. Chickens cluck half-heartedly from the shadows, as if complaining about the early hour. In many frontier households, livestock meant survival itself. Milk, meat, labor, transport, and checking on them was often the very first task of the day, the most important assurance that another day could begin at all. You move carefully among them, breaking the thin ice that has formed on water troughs, scattering fresh hay where it will be most welcomed, running your gloved hand along a warm flank, just to remind yourself that warmth still exists, that life still pushes back against winter's grip. The animals breathe around you, each exhale a warm cloud in the cold air, and in this small dim barn you feel something like peace. When you step back outside, the sun has risen a little higher, its rays slicing across the prairie in bands of sharp light. The cold hasn't faded, not even slightly, but the world looks different now, gentler in its brightness, more defined. The cabin's door stands open, warm air drifting out like a golden ribbon, and you can hear faint voices inside as the family begins to move about, folding quilts, melting snow, stirring whatever simple breakfast can be assembled from what remains in the pantry. You head back across the yard, boots crunching in steady rhythm, and as you walk you realize how frontier mornings held a strange kind of duality, harsh enough to steal one's breath, yet beautiful enough to make each sunrise feel like a gift, a promise that the night had not claimed you, that the world in all its cold, immense stillness had allowed you one more day. The door closes behind you, muffling the outside world, and you are greeted with the welcome sting of warmth from the hearth. Quilts are draped over chairs to thaw, someone pours steaming water into a tin cup, and the smell of something simple but comforting, perhaps oats or boiled cornmeal, begins to drift through the room. You settle down, hands extended toward the fire, and as the warmth seeps slowly back into your bones, a quiet truth settles over you. Out here, every morning is a victory, every breath a small defiance against the winter, and every step across that frozen ground proof that people found ways not just to survive, but to live within the hardship. Once your fingers begin to thaw and the sting of returning warmth fades into a tolerable ache, you notice the room shifting again. This time not from sleep to waking, but from waking to work. The slow transition every frontier household made each morning, as they reshaped themselves from shivering sleepers into people capable of facing another day, in a land that asked more from them than it ever promised to return. A woman moves toward the hearth, stirring the pot with slow, practiced motions, her breath still visible in faint clouds each time she leans too close to the draft creeping in beneath the door. A man bends near a crate by the wall, pulling out tools whose metal heads glint faintly in the firelight, each one still cold enough to bite bare skin. A child sits on the edge of the bed, rubbing sleep from their eyes, toes curling against the floorboards, as if they can sense the cold radiating up through the wood. In this dim, flickering quiet, breakfast becomes less a meal and more a ritual of warming the body. The pot of oats thickens slowly, sending a thin thread of steam upward like a promise. Sometimes it was mush made from cornmeal, sometimes a weak broth if supplies were low, and occasionally, if fortune allowed, scraps of dried apple or pork fat softened into the mixture. The smell is simple but potent, warming the room even before the food passes anyone's lips, and you watch as bowls chipped from years of use are placed on the table one by one, waiting to be filled. You settle onto a rough bench as the first portion is ladled out, steam rising in pale curls, warming your face before you even bring the spoon to your lips. The taste is plain, earthy, slightly smoky, tinged with the faint bitterness of melted snow, but it carries a comfort far greater than its flavor. Frontier journals mention over and over how hot food felt like a kind of shield, a way to prepare the body for cold that would soon press into every inch of exposed skin the moment work began outside. Someone laughs quietly at the table, unexpected, soft, almost swallowed by the room. But in winter, such small bursts of levity meant more than they appeared. People survived long stretches of hardship on moments just like that. A joke whispered between tasks, a story shared around the fire, a memory recited to distract from hunger or fear. You feel that warmth now, spreading outward in a slow ripple that has nothing to do with the food you're eating. Once the bowls are empty and the fire is fed again, the real work begins. A man pulls on his coat, the heavy wool stiff with smoke, and ties a scarf tightly around his neck. His hat, patched at the crown, is tugged low enough to shadow his eyes, and he slips into his boots with a grunt that betrays both age and exhaustion. He reaches for the axe near the door, its blade frozen with a thin silver crust, and rests it across his shoulder like an extension of his own spine. Firewood is always needed, no matter how many stacks you cut the day before. Nearby, someone gathers buckets, their metal rims biting into gloved fingers. Frozen water must be broken, carried, heated, livestock must be fed, tools must be checked. If a storm has passed, the path to the barn must be cleared. If snow has drifted too high, then shovels must carve tunnels through white walls. Winter chores are not optional. The land allows no excuses. You watch as each person prepares themselves, layering swaths of wool and leather, until they resemble moving bundles more than individuals. Children are wrapped too, caps pulled low, scarves tied snugly, small hands tucked into oversized mittens, and though their tasks are lighter, they are not spared. Frontier children worked alongside adults, hauling small loads of wood, fetching kindling, tending animals, sweeping frost from the doorway. Outside the window, the sun has climbed just high enough to scatter pale gold across the snow, turning every drift into a glittering sheet of ice. The beauty is undeniable, breathtaking, even, but beauty has a sharp edge here. The cold beneath that sparkle is deep and ancient, ready to punish anyone who lingers too long. The man with the axe opens the door again, and the cold rushes in like a presence, commanding attention. Everyone pauses, if only for a heartbeat, as though acknowledging the arrival of an old familiar adversary. Then they step out one by one, boots crunching on the frozen ground, the air swallowing their breath and carrying it upward like smoke. You follow, letting the door close behind you with a muted thud. For a moment you stand still, watching as the family divides to their tasks, one heading toward the woodpile, another toward the barn, another scraping snow away from the path. Each movement slow but determined, each breath a visible testament to their will to endure. The cold wraps around you again, not cruelly, not angrily, but with the heavy embrace of something that simply is, something that will not yield but will not take more than you allow if you are prepared and respectful. And in this clear morning air, amidst the glittering calm and the unspoken urgency, you begin to understand something quietly profound. The Wild West winter was not survived in grand gestures or brave acts, but in the steady rhythm of simple tasks done every single day: cutting wood, feeding animals, melting snow, keeping the fire alive. Small acts that collectively built a fortress against the cold. As you watch the family working in the stillness, breath rising like smoke, tools meeting wood with soft echoes, animals stirring behind barn doors, it becomes clear that life out here was not about conquering nature, but cooperating with it, step by cold step, morning after morning, until winter finally loosened its grip. By midday the light has changed again, shifting from the pale silver of dawn to a colder, clearer brightness that seems to sharpen every edge of the world. Shadows stretch long and blue across the snow, and the wind carries a rhythm that feels older than anything human, steady, patient, almost watchful. The family moves through it with a practiced calm, their silhouettes small against the vast openness of the prairie, each person absorbed in tasks that feel endless yet essential. There is a strange silence to winter work, not an absence of sound, but a quiet made of repetition. The axe rises and falls with a soft thunk, burying itself in frozen logs that splinter reluctantly, each piece snapping with the dry crack of something brittle giving way. The shovel scrapes against ice, the metal edge ringing faintly like a distant bell each time it finds solid ground. From the barn comes the muffled rustle of hay, and the low breath of animals shifting their weight, their warm bodies steaming gently in the cold. You fall into this rhythm too, sweeping snow away from the cabin's entrance in slow arcs, the bristles of the broom stiff with frost. The cold does not stab as sharply now. It has settled into something steady, a chill that clings to you without surprising you anymore. Your muscles begin to ache from the repetition, but it is an ache that feels honest, grounded, the kind that frontier families learn to welcome rather than fear. It meant they were working. It meant they were alive. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, nobody is sweating. Winter rarely allows such luxuries, but the constant motion has carved a small bubble of warmth beneath your layers. You pause, just long enough to feel the faint heat rising from your own body, and breathe slowly into the frigid air. The steam curls upward like a thin ghost, dissolving before it reaches the sky. Inside the cabin, lunch is a simple affair, perhaps leftover porridge reheated with a bit of meltwater, or flatbread crisped on the hearth, or, if the family is fortunate, a strip of salted meat softened in a pot until it becomes chewable again. The smell is humble, nothing bold or fragrant, yet it carries a kind of reassurance, a reminder that not all tasks in winter are cold or urgent. Some simply nourish. You sit by the fire once more, bowl warm in your hands, and let the heat soak gradually up your arms. Even the smallest flame feels like a luxury, its glow painting amber patterns across the walls and softening the harsh angles of the room. You can hear the faint crackle as resin escapes from the wood, a tiny sound that would be lost in any other season but feels intimate now, a companion to your thoughts. By afternoon, the chores continue with the same steady focus. Animals are checked again, tools mended, boots scraped clean of ice. The woodpile grows slowly, each log a small victory against the night. Children gather sticks and fallen branches, their laughter carried faintly on the wind, rising and falling like sparks from the fire. Even laughter sounds colder in winter, sharper, thinner, but it is laughter all the same, and it lifts the day in ways nothing else can. The sky gradually shifts toward its evening colors, though in winter the sun never climbs high enough to make the transition dramatic. Instead, the light simply softens, growing bluer, then grayer, as though the day is exhaling its final breath. The air grows colder by degrees, so subtle you only notice them when your fingers begin to stiffen again, when your breath grows heavier, when the slight warmth inside your clothes fades into memory. You gather the last armful of sticks and carry them toward the cabin, boots crunching in a rhythm that echoes softly through the wide open space. Behind you, the barn door creaks closed, and the animals settle for the evening. their forms shifting quietly inside the warm shadows. The cabin windows glow faintly now, small, flickering rectangles of light carved into the vast blue dusk. When you step inside, the warmth envelops you like a blessing, followed instantly by the familiar sense of smoke and damp wool, straw, and melting frost. Quilts are laid out again near the fire, to soften the chill they gathered during the day. The table is cleared of the noon meal, and another pot sits ready for supper. Its ingredients humble but loyal: beans, maybe, or potatoes, or simply broth thickened with bits of root vegetables saved from autumn. Even the fire sounds different at this hour, more confident, more familiar, popping and hissing as though happy to be fed again. The flames paint slow-moving patterns across the log walls, turning the scratches and seams into dancing shapes, the way they did the night before, and the night before that, going back through years of winters endured and survived. You sit, the ache in your legs settling into something softer, something almost pleasant. Around you, the family gathers quietly, sharing stories in low voices, mending clothes, sharpening tools, offering each other the simple comfort of presence. Outside, the sky fades toward deeper blue, then toward the first hints of night. And as you watch the fire breathe and listen to the soft murmur of those around you, a single truth becomes clear. Days in the Wild West winter were not marked by triumphs or failures, but by steady persistence, by the gentle endurance of ordinary tasks repeated bravely in a world built to test them. As the last of the daylight drains from the sky, the cabin settles into a soft, familiar hush, the kind that only comes after a long winter day when every chore has been completed, every animal tended, every tool laid to rest by the door. The blue-grey dusk outside thickens into true evening, the air sharpening as the temperature drops, and soon the windows no longer glow but simply reflect the flicker of the hearth like small trembling mirrors. Inside, the fire grows brighter by contrast, its flames casting long orange shadows that sway gently across the walls as if the cabin itself were breathing. Someone feeds the hearth a thick log, and the sparks rise with a quiet hiss, filling the room with a deeper, fuller warmth that gathers in pockets, around the hearthstones, beneath the table, along the straw ticks laid close to the blaze. These small islands of heat become magnets for tired bodies. Supper is eating slowly, quietly. Hunger is constant in winter, not a desperate starvation, but a low hum that never fully disappears. So even the simplest meal feels comforting. The pot of beans or broth or porridge is passed around, spoons clinking softly against tin bowls. Children eat with the bleary focus of fatigue, their cheeks blotched red from the cold, and their eyes already drooping. Adults chew thoughtfully, thinking not of flavor but of fuel, gathering enough strength to face another night. When the bowls are empty and rinsed with a little meltwater, the evening rituals begin. A few quilts are shaken out, sending tiny crystals of frost scattering like dust, and laid out to warm near the fire. Wet mittens are draped over chairs. Boots stiff with salt and frozen mud are placed near the hearth, where they will thaw slowly, becoming pliable again by morning. Someone spreads fresh straw across part of the floor, its dry rustle filling the room with the scent of old summer sun, a welcome contrast to the cold, heavy air. You watch as the room transforms from a place of activity into a nest for the night. This change is not sudden, it unfolds gradually, like watching fog roll in over a meadow. The voices grow quieter, the movements slower, the air thicker with warmth and exhaustion. Outside, the wind begins to rise again, not violently but with a steady insistence that hints at what the night may bring. The cabin creaks in answer, timbers shifting as they tighten against the dropping temperature, and that familiar, high, brittle sound travels through the room like a small warning. But no one looks startled. They've heard it 1,000 times. It is simply the house settling in for the night. Someone reaches for the lamp, a small tin lantern with a wick floating in oil, and lights it with a trembling spark from the hearth. The flame glows weakly at first, then steadies, casting a warm halo over the corner of the table. The light is precious, carefully preserved, Fuel is too valuable to waste, and so this lamp will be snuffed long before the fire is allowed to fade. A father checks the door one last time, pushing against it until the frost-crusted wood seals tightly against the frame. A mother tucks a thin, oiled paper curtain into place near a window to prevent drafts. A child is wrapped in so many layers that only their eyes peek out from beneath scarves and blankets, blinking sleepily as they are instructed to crawl closer to the hearth. You loosen your own boots, your feet grateful for release, and rub warmth back into them slowly. The fire crackles louder now, as if sensing that everyone is ready to surrender to rest, and the flame begins its nightly performance, popping, hissing, turning logs into glowing pillars that radiate amber light through the room. The conversations taper off. A story is told softly, gently, about something that happened years ago, or something that might have happened, or something the family hopes will happen once spring comes and the world is green again. Stories are as essential as blankets here. They warm the mind the way hides warm the body, weaving comfort into the spaces between breaths. Gradually, bedding is arranged. Buffalo robes are unfolded and spread across the straw ticks. Quilts patched with a lifetime of scraps are layered on top. Children climb beneath them first, curling like kittens into warmth. Adults follow one by one, sliding into the narrow spaces, shoulders touching, knees brushing, warmth spreading between bodies like a whispered secret. You slip beneath your own coverings, the weight of the hide sinking around you in a slow embrace. Your skin tingles where cold air clings to it, but soon the warmth begins to build, thin at first, then thicker, as the fire casts its glow across your face. You pull the quilt up to your chin, and exhale a slow stream of breath that curls upward in a faint silver plume before dissolving. The fire dims slightly, settling into its night-long vigil. The lamp is snuffed with a soft hiss. Darkness settles gently across the room. The cabin breathes with you. Outside, the wind grows louder, brushing against the walls like a restless animal, testing the strength of the logs, slipping its cold fingers through every tiny seam. But inside, there is a different kind of silence forming. A warm, heavy quiet shaped by shared breaths, steady heartbeats, and the slow surrender of bodies exhausted from the day. As your eyes begin to close, you feel the whole world shrinking down to this one room, this one fire, this one small circle of warmth carved out of the endless winter. And in that shrinking world, comfort takes on a new meaning. Not softness, not luxury, but the simple miracle of surviving one more day, of climbing beneath hides with those who share your burdens, of closing your eyes knowing that the fire burns and the walls hold. And as sleep begins to take you, softly, slowly, like snow settling on a silent prairie, you understand why frontier families cherished nights like these, harsh as they were, because cold may own the wilderness, but warmth, however fragile, owns the heart. As you settle beneath the heavy buffalo hides and the patchwork quilts stitched from generations of worn-out shirts and dresses, you feel the cabin sinking into a deep, breathing quiet that is not quite silence and not quite stillness, but a kind of living hush in which every creak of the timber walls, every faint rustle of straw beneath shifting bodies, every soft pop from the fire becomes woven into the tapestry of the night. And in that dim, flickering darkness you begin to understand that sleep out here, in the brutal winters of the Wild West, is never a gentle drifting or a peaceful surrender, but rather a fragile truce between human warmth and the relentless cold, pressing insistently from every direction. Your breath rises slowly in pale, ghost-like curls that float upward, before dissolving into the rafters already traced with delicate frost like lace spun by the night itself. And as your eyelids lower, heavy from the long day's labour, you become aware of how the cold retreats only slightly from the centre of the room, gathering now along the edges of the walls, as if waiting for the fire to weaken before daring to creep forward again, creating a pocket of warmth just large enough for you and the others to huddle together and borrow what rest you can before morning demands more of your strength. The sounds of sleep unfold around you in soft, irregular rhythms. Someone shifting closer to the fire, someone else releasing a tired sigh, a child murmuring incoherently before going limp again beneath the covers. And these small noises, instead of breaking the silence, seem to shape it, forming a kind of shared lullaby born not from peace but from exhaustion. Because everyone in this room knows that sleep is necessary, not optional, a nightly effort taken in pieces and fragments rather than in long, indulgent stretches. You can feel your own body drifting toward that half-dreaming state where warmth becomes softer, thoughts lose their edges, and the mind begins blending memory with imagination. And as this happens, you also notice how the cabin itself feels alive, groaning softly, as the cold tightens its grip on the timbers, shifting subtly under the weight of snow on the roof, breathing in and out with every gust of wind that slides along the outer walls. And somehow this living, creaking presence becomes comforting, as though the building is keeping watch with you, determined to stand through the night. Sleep arrives in waves, brief, shallow descents into unconsciousness, followed by slow returns to awareness, as the fire pops or the wind throws a handful of snow against the door, and in those in-between moments your thoughts float to strange places. The memory of warmer seasons, the imagined comfort of thick feather mattresses you've never actually touched, the steady hum of summer insects replaced now by the whisper of winter wind, and perhaps even the quiet fear that waking up in a cold cabin is never guaranteed when the night is harsh enough. Yet despite the flickers of worry and the constant edge of frost clawing at the quilts, you feel yourself drifting deeper each time, held by the combined warmth of bodies pressed close together, the heavy weight of the hides trapping heat like a primitive cocoon, and the steady glow of the fire casting amber light over closed eyes. And in that slowly dimming world you understand why frontier families cherished even broken sleep, because it meant the fire was still alive, the cabin still standing, and the night, however cold, had not claimed its due. And so you surrender to the darkness with the quiet acceptance of someone who knows that sleep here is not a luxury but a necessity, a small, stubborn act of endurance against the wilderness outside. And you let your breathing match the rhythm of the room, long and slow, while the cold prowls at the edges, the rafters gather frost like silver constellations, the fire hums its soft heartbeat of warmth, and the wild west winter wraps the cabin in its unforgiving silence once more. As you drift deeper into that fragile, shifting sleep, the boundary between the waking world and the dreaming world begins to blur in the same slow, drifting way. Frost creeps across a window pane, and your mind, numbed by cold and softened by exhaustion, begins to weave together scraps of memory, fear, and hope into long, wandering visions that feel as real as the fire's fading warmth against your cheek, yet distant enough that you cannot quite hold on to them when you try. Somewhere in the darkness, a log collapses inside the hearth with a muted thud, sending a soft gust of sparks upward, and the momentary brightness flickers across the inside of your closed eyelids, stirring you just enough for consciousness to rise like a slow tide. But before you can fully wake, you sink again, your thoughts stretching into a strange winter landscape that mirrors the world outside, endless white plains, sky sharpened to a pale blade, and the distant, lonely call of something moving beneath the moon. Your breathing deepens, its slow rhythm matching the soft chorus of the others sleeping around you, and in your dream you hear the same breath rising and falling, like a low wind brushing through a stand of ghostly cottonwoods. In the wild west winter, dreams often reflected the day's struggles, hunger taking the form of abandoned tables laden with unreachable food, fear appearing as collapsing roofs or invisible footsteps pressing through the snow, exhaustion turning into visions of walking endlessly across drifts that never ended. And you can sense those echoes shaping your own dream now, though they shift so fluidly you can never hold on to one image for long. The cold touches your face again, not enough to wake you, but enough to twist the dream around it. One moment you are sitting by a roaring summer river, sunlight sparkling like coins on the surface, and the next you are standing on frozen ground so cold it stings through your boots, and the river has become a silent ribbon of ice stretching into the distance. The human mind, startled by cold, often drifts toward warmth in dreams, and for a moment you feel the soft brush of heat on your skin, the memory of something gentle, perhaps a summer night long gone. Then the wind outside shifts, sliding against the cabin walls with a long, low moan, and the sound seeps into your dream like breath drifting into smoke, turning the warm memory into something else. Snow swirling in spirals, the horizon erased beneath a white curtain, the outline of a lone figure trudging forward, head down, shoulders hunched against the storm. You murmur something without meaning to, the sound barely audible beneath the heavy hides, and someone beside you shifts in response, not consciously, not fully awake, but instinctively, the way bodies in the cold tend to move as a single organism, adjusting to seal gaps where warmth might escape, hands brushing fabric, shoulders pressing closer, breath warming breath. Your dream changes again, becoming softer, quieter, as if soothed by that small movement. You find yourself inside the cabin, but not this cabin, one larger, brighter, with wooden beams polished smooth and windows glowing with candlelight. It is the kind of home settlers fantasized about during long winters, a warm place with featherbeds and thicker walls, and a fire that never left embers, only flame. You step toward the hearth in the dream, and feel its heat wrap around you, full and golden, and for a moment you believe it, you trust it, you let yourself relax in its warmth. But just as your hands reach for the imagined fire, a cold draft snakes beneath your quilt in the real world, sliding along your spine with the stealth of a winter animal, and the shock of it ripples through your sleep, unraveling the dream like a loose thread pulled too quickly. The cabin in your mind darkens, the fire fades, and suddenly you are hovering again between worlds, aware of your body and yet still drifting, suspended in a thin layer of consciousness that frontier families knew all too well. Your eyes remain closed, but you can sense the room around you. The crackling of the fire as it struggles against the night, the slow creak of the timbers adjusting under the cold, the faint whistle of wind slipping through a seam in the wall, and the steady breathing of those sharing the bed, their warmth pressing into your side like soft embers refusing to go out. In this half-dreaming state, thoughts stretch into long, slow shapes, whether the fire will hold, whether the storm outside will worsen, whether morning will bring a sky clear enough for chores to ease, whether the cold will find new ways to creep into the cabin before dawn. These thoughts do not frighten you anymore. They simply drift through your mind like snowflakes blown across the plain, momentary, weightless, destined to melt into the quiet numbness of sleep. And gradually the dream returns, not as vivid or warm as before, but gentler, softer, shaped by the steady rhythm of the room rather than the chill of the wind. You feel yourself lying beneath the quilts, the weight of the hides anchoring you like a protective shield, the fire's faint glow pulsing through your closed eyelids, and the darkness settles again around you in a slow, comforting wave. Your breathing deepens. Your muscles loosen. The cold holds its distance for now, and once more, sleep claims you, not fully, not peacefully, but enough, just enough, the way it has claimed countless others on countless winter nights across the Wild West, giving you a fragile thread of rest to cling to until morning returns. Sleep folds over you again, not as a single uninterrupted descent, but as a series of drifting layers, each one sliding gently across your mind like thin veils of snow, settling over a frozen field, and in this quiet, suspended state you begin to feel the weight of the night, not as a threat but as something ancient and immense, a presence that presses softly on the cabin walls, while allowing you just enough space to dream, breathe, and endure. The fire has burned lower now, reduced to a bed of glowing coals whose faint red pulses illuminate the room in slow, rhythmic breaths, and the warmth they offer is subtle, not enough to banish the cold entirely, but enough to keep it at bay, circling at the edges of the room like a patient predator waiting for an opening. You sense that cold even in your sleep, a thin halo of frost forming where the hides do not fully cover your shoulders, but your body has learned to ignore it, to accept that discomfort is merely part of the landscape of night. You shift slightly on the straw tick, and the dry stalks beneath you whisper their familiar brittle song, releasing the faint scent of last summer's fields, a scent that frontier families often described as oddly comforting, even in the midst of harsh winters, because it reminded them that warmth and life still existed somewhere in the world beyond the storm. The smell blends with the smoky tang drifting from the hearth and the musk of wool and tanned hide, forming a quiet alchemy of scents that has lulled generations into sleep, long before your eyes ever closed. As your mind drifts further, the sounds around you begin to bend into your dreams. The slow sigh of someone turning over becomes the hush of wind brushing through tall grass. The creak of a shifting log becomes the echo of a distant wagon wheel. The faint yip of a coyote far beyond the cabin walls stretches into a dreamlike call from across a moonlit plain. Dreams in the Wild West winter often took shape from the simplest noises, transforming them into vast nighttime landscapes that mirrored the fierce loneliness or the fierce beauty of frontier life. In one moment you are walking through a field of snow so deep your boots vanish with every step, yet you do not feel the cold. Only a strange pull, a sense that someone is waiting just over the next ridge. In another, you find yourself seated at a warm table that glows with lamplight, surrounded by faces you recognize but cannot place, their features shifting like firelight on a wall, familiar yet unreachable. And then, almost instantly, these shapes dissolve as another creak rattles through the cabin, tugging you back toward waking before releasing you again into the drifting half-dark. A small draft snakes through the chinking in the logs and glides across your cheek, sharp enough to stir you but not enough to wake you fully, and that cold thread becomes woven into the dream, transformed into a breeze sweeping across a riverbank, or the breath of a horse standing near a campfire. On nights like this, the line between discomfort and imagination is impossibly thin, and the winter cold becomes both the enemy and the sculptor of your dreams. Someone beside you shifts closer, and the warmth of their body spreads across your ribs and spine like a slow-moving ember. This small shared heat is more powerful than any single blanket. Frontier families knew this instinctively, almost unconsciously, arranging themselves at night so that no one faced the cold alone. The subtle pressure of another shoulder, the muffled brush of fabric, the quiet rise and fall of a sleeping chest, all these tiny sensations ease the mind in ways fire alone cannot. Outside, the wind rises again, its long voice stretching across the plains with a raw, distant wail that threads itself through the cracks in the cabin walls. Yet even this sound feels softened by your drifting consciousness. To someone fully awake, it might bring a flicker of fear, a reminder of the vast, indifferent wilderness just beyond the door, but to you, half asleep and wrapped in warmth, it becomes something else, a lonely song echoing across an endless night, ancient and unchanging. The cabin groans once more, this time a deep, resonant shudder that travels through the floorboards and up into the walls, and the vibration brushes against your spine in a way that briefly pulls you toward wakefulness. For an instant your eyes almost open, catching the faint glow of embers through your lashes, but your mind refuses to leave the comfort of drifting sleep, and you let yourself slip back down, trusting the timbers to hold as countless others have trusted before you. Your dream reshapes itself again, this time into a strange, weightless sensation floating above the snow-covered plains, the sky wide and starlit, the world below frozen into stillness, every tree and hill and creek swallowed beneath winter's pale blanket. There is freedom here, even in the cold, a vast expanse where time stretches thin, and the night does not threaten so much as cradle you in its immeasurable quiet. The sound of a popping ember travels through the room like a small heartbeat, and all at once your drifting thoughts slow, your breath deepens, your body melts into the bedding, and the edges of your awareness dissolve completely. Sleep takes you again, gently and fully this time. Not peaceful, not warm, but sufficient and real. The same kind of sleep that carried countless souls through countless nights in the unforgiving winters of the Wild West. Sleep holds you in its shifting embrace for a while longer, but as the darkest part of the night settles over the prairie, something begins to change. A subtle stirring in the air, a thinning of the warmth between bodies, a quiet reminder that the cold is patient, and no matter how deeply you sleep, it will always try to reclaim whatever ground it lost. Your breathing grows uneven, not from fear or discomfort, but from the body's instinctive reaction to the gradual cooling of the room. The fire has burned low again, reduced to a faint bed of embers that pulse like dim stars scattered across a horizon of ash. Their warmth is fragile now, barely reaching beyond the hearth, and the cold seizes its moment. It slides down from the corners of the cabin in an almost deliberate crawl, slipping beneath quilts and hides, brushing across your legs like a thin, icy hand. Even in sleep you feel it, and your mind, sensing the shift, responds in the only way it knows. Your dream bends around the cold, adjusting itself so that the chill becomes part of its landscape rather than a disruption. Now you are riding across a wide, silent field of frost, the snow glittering silver beneath the moon, your breath fogging the air in luminous clouds that dissolve as quickly as they appear. The cold is sharp in this vision, but not painful, just omnipresent, settling into your bones like something ancient and immovable. Somewhere in the distance you hear the soft snort of a horse, the jingle of a bridle, and then the world quiets again, vast and empty. A shift beside you, someone pulling their blanket tighter, sends a ripple of warmth back across your ribs, and in your dream the sensation becomes the gentle press of a companion's hand on your shoulder, steadying you as you ride. The frontier mind often blurred the line between comfort and imagination, and you feel that now the warmth of another sleeper grounding you, even while the dream carries you far from the cabin walls. Another faint noise, the dry rustle of straw stirred by a turning body, drifts into your half-dreaming ear, becoming in your mind the sound of prairie grass brushed by a passing night wind. Dreams on bitter nights often took the shape of the land itself, pulling sleepers outward into the sprawling world that surrounded them. And you are no exception. In your drifting thoughts, the cabin fades, replaced by a landscape carved from snow and silence. But then, slowly, a new sensation creeps in, a warmth on your cheek, gentle but insistent, almost like the first touch of dawn. It draws you upward, tugging softly at the edges of your consciousness, and your dream shifts again. Now you are standing before a campfire glowing bright against the snow, the flames rising with a sudden vigor, sparks flying upward like tiny meteors. Your sleeping body recognizes the truth before your mind does. Someone is tending the fire. A faint scrape of iron against iron confirms it. A poker being lifted, embers being stirred, logs being shifted to catch. Even without opening your eyes, you feel the room brighten slightly as new flames begin to take shape, their glow pushing back the cold with renewed determination. The warmth rolls outward in slow waves, brushing across your hands, your shoulder, your cheek, melting the thin veil of frost that had crept into the bedding. Your dream responds instantly. The solitary fire in the snow transforms into a great blaze, warm and alive. Shadows retreat. Breath becomes lighter. The cold thins into mist. Half awake now, you sink deeper into the bedding, letting the returning warmth draw you back towards sleep, rather than up toward wakefulness. The fire crackles softly, its voice low and steady, and your body, reassured by the revival of heat, loosens again, surrendering once more to rest. The cold, pushed back but not defeated, withdraws to the corners of the room and waits. Your breathing evens out again. The quilts settle over you like a heavy snowdrift, protective, dense, and comforting. The room becomes a cocoon of shared warmth and flickering firelight, and as the night stretches on, you slip once more into the drifting, dream-laden quiet of frontier sleep. a sleep made not of softness or peace, but of endurance, instinct, and the fragile promise that warmth, though fleeting, can always be coaxed back to life if someone is willing to rise and tend the flame. The hours slip by in a quiet that feels almost suspended outside of time, and somewhere in the depth of that darkness, your body begins to sense the slow, subtle shift toward morning, not because the cold lessens, nor because light enters the cabin, but because the stillness itself changes, taking on a faint expectancy that brushes against your consciousness like a whisper, urging you upward from the layers of sleep. You do not wake suddenly. You rise through sleep the way one surfaces through deep water, slowly, reluctantly, feeling each layer grow thinner as the world above calls you toward it. Your breathing changes first. It grows a little deeper, a little more deliberate, as though your lungs recognize that soon they will need to draw air chilled by dawn, rather than the muffled warmth trapped beneath the quilts. Then comes the awareness of sound. At first, only the steady crackle of the fire reaches you, a softened murmur now that the flames have dwindled again, offering only the faint glow of embers. Their light is too weak to warm the room fully, and the cold has returned with patience and persistence, curling along the floorboards and sliding beneath the hides with a familiar insistence. Yet the presence of embers, however faint, is enough to reassure you that the night has not been lost. You stir slightly, lifting your cheek from the rough quilt, and the air that brushes your skin is sharp and brittle, cold enough to make you flinch even without opening your eyes. Your dream dissolves instantly, as fragile as frost touched by sunlight, leaving behind only a faint impression of snowfields and distant fires. Another sound reaches you then, soft shifting, slow breathing, the subtle rustle of a child curling closer beneath the covers. The entire cabin seems to wake in gentle waves, not with words or movement, but with tiny adjustments. Someone pulling a hide tighter, someone sighing into their pillow, someone stretching aching legs before nestling back into the straw. No one rises yet. This is the quietest moment of the day, the narrow space between night's cold grip and morning's demands, a space where people cling to whatever warmth they have left. You open your eyes only halfway, and the world that greets you is dim and muted. The cabin is still mostly dark, but there is a difference in the quality of the darkness. Less heavy, less complete. A faint bluish cast seeps along the cracks of the shuttered window, hinting that the sky outside is beginning to pale, even if the sun itself remains hidden behind the horizon. Your vision drifts upward to the rafters, where the frost has formed in intricate, delicate webs, catching the ember glow like tiny shards of glass. Some crystals have already begun to melt where the fire's warmth has brushed them, leaving small droplets that hang trembling before falling onto the quilts below with cold, startling taps. You pull the buffalo hide closer to your chin. Your limbs feel stiff, as though the cold has frozen your joints from the inside. This heaviness is familiar to anyone who has slept through a frontier winter night. The body accepts the cold while lying still, but once wakefulness begins to creep in, every muscle realizes how tightly it has curled and how long it has held tension just to preserve heat. A faint groan escapes your throat, and you shift your weight, trying to find a position that does not feel locked in place. The straw crackles beneath you, releasing that dry, grassy scent again. A small, unexpected comfort that makes the moment feel more bearable, as though the remnants of last summer have been woven into this bitter dawn. Beside you, someone moves just a small nudge of a knee or elbow, and the exchanged warmth is enough to make you close your eyes again, unwilling to let go of the last traces of shared heat. For a few breaths you hover between sleep and waking, knowing that rising too soon will expose you fully to the cabin's cold, yet also sensing that responsibilities are waiting. The fire needs tending, animals need checking, water must be thawed or drawn. The fire pops faintly, as if sensing your hesitation, and a thin plume of smoke slides upward through the chimney, its smell drifting across the room like a reminder of everything that must be done before the day can truly begin. But still, no one rises. Not yet. The frontier taught people to seize even the smallest pockets of rest, And this is one of those moments, a fragile sliver of time where the world is neither fully night nor fully day, where warmth is slipping away but not yet gone, where sleep is still close enough to reach if you let your breathing deepen again. You exhale slowly, watching your breath curl in a pale cloud that drifts upward, joining the thinning frost patterns above. The room is waking, the world outside is brightening, and the day will soon demand your strength. But for these few final moments, you let yourself remain exactly where you are, wrapped in hides, surrounded by soft breaths, held between cold and warmth, listening to the heartbeat of a wooden cabin that has survived another brutal winter night. The moment finally arrives when the night can no longer hold itself together, and the subtle shift from darkness to dawn becomes too insistent to ignore. It begins with the faintest tremor of movement, one small rustle near the hearth, then the slow, deliberate sigh of a body preparing to leave the fragile sanctuary of shared warmth. You do not open your eyes at first, but the sound tells you everything. Someone has decided to be the first to rise, the one who will brave the cold so that the others may linger a few minutes longer in the cocoon of quilts and hides. A soft grunt follows, low and tired, as if the person is negotiating with their own aching limbs. The straw beneath them crackles sharply, breaking the quiet like brittle twigs underfoot. Then comes the unmistakable scrape of a palm sliding across a quilt, searching for balance, and the shifting weight of someone pushing themselves upright. The cold notices instantly. It rushes in to claim what warmth the rising body leaves behind, sliding into the empty space with a silent, eager chill. Even half asleep, you feel it, a sudden loss of heat at your side, a ghostly reminder that comfort here is always temporary. You hear bare feet, or perhaps sock-covered ones, touch the floorboards, followed by a sharp intake of breath from the person now standing. The planks are icy enough to sting through even thick wool, and that small hiss of discomfort carries through the room like the first note of morning. For a moment the figure just stands there, swaying faintly in the dim blue haze, letting their eyes adjust, letting their body accept the cold. Then, slowly, deliberately, they pad toward the hearth. The embers greet them with a faint glow, soft and pulsing like the last heartbeat of a fading creature. You hear the rustle of kindling being gathered, a handful of twigs, perhaps a few splinters shaved from yesterday's firewood, and then the quiet scrape of iron as they reach for the poker. The coals shift with a muffled sigh, sparks rising like tiny golden insects before fading against the dark. A moment later, the first crack of a new flame, sharp and bright. It's small at first, barely more than a trembling point of orange, but as the kindling catches, the flame grows, licking upward along the wood until the fire begins to reclaim the hearth with soft crackles and the faint, sweet smell of burning pine. Heat radiates outward in timid pulses, not yet strong enough to warm the room, but enough to promise that warmth is on its way. Around you, bodies stir, not fully waking, but acknowledging the return of fire in tiny movements. Someone drawing their quilt tighter, someone rolling onto their back, someone exhaling a deeper breath as the faint warmth brushes their cheek. The cabin feels less like a frozen shell now and more like something slowly coming alive again. Then comes the most dreaded sound of the morning, the wooden latch of the door being lifted. Your entire body tenses. A split second later, the door cracks open, and the outside world rushes in, a blast of air so sharp it feels like a blade dragged across your exposed skin, slicing through quilts, slipping under hides, stealing every small pocket of warmth that hasn't been tucked away. You gasp involuntarily, as does nearly everyone else. Even half asleep, the instinct is immediate. Curl, retreat, shield yourself from that intruding cold. The person at the door mutters something under their breath, perhaps a curse, perhaps a prayer, as they step outside. The wind snatches the sound away before it fully forms. For a moment the door remains open, letting the brutal dawn air coil through the room like a living thing. Then it shuts again with a heavy thud, and the cold that entered settles low, swirling over the floorboards before slowly rising toward the bedding. You pull the hide tighter, Your breath frosts again in front of your face. The fire crackles, determined to rebuild what the winter wind has just stolen. And above it all, you hear faint movement outside. Boots crunching in snow, the thump of someone clearing drifts from the doorstep, the distant muffled creak of a barn door being tested against the ice. Morning chores have begun, even though the sky is still only a pale suggestion of light. Inside, the cabin warms by degrees. The returning fire glows brighter. The frost on the rafters softens, dripping in slow rhythm. The cold retreats inch by inch. And you, still curled beneath the hides, know that soon you will have to rise too, face the freezing air, tend to your part of the dawn. But for one more moment, you breathe deeply, letting your eyes remain closed, holding on to the last remnants of night's fragile warmth before the wild west winter day fully claims you. As the first reluctant stirrings of morning settle fully into your bones, you feel the moment arriving when you can no longer pretend sleep still holds you. And so, with a slow exhale that steams faintly in the dim air, you begin to peel yourself from the warm nest of bodies and hides, lifting the heavy quilt from your chest and immediately regretting it, as a wave of icy air slips beneath the edge and spreads across your ribs like a sheet of frozen water, urging you instinctively to retreat, but knowing that if you surrender to that instinct, you will never rise at all. Your hand reaches out first, brushing against the coarse surface of the buffalo hide, and you feel how cold it has grown on the outer edge, the warmth held only in the areas where bodies pressed against it through the night. And as you slide the hide aside, you notice how the cold clings to your fingers, stiffening them as though the air itself is made of frost. You shift your weight carefully, the straw beneath you crackling in protest, and every muscle in your back tightens in response, not from pain exactly, but from the shock of leaving even the slightest bit of warmth behind. When your feet finally touch the floorboards, the cold is so sharp it steals your breath for a moment, seeping through your socks as if the wood were carved from solid ice. The sensation climbs your calves with swift determination, reminding you that mornings here demand both resolve and speed. You stand fully now, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped instinctively around your torso as though you could trap the fading warmth against your skin, and for a few seconds you simply breathe through the discomfort, watching each exhale drift upward in a pale, misty plume that curls into the rafters before dissolving among the remaining dusting of frost. Around you, the cabin is beginning to wake in small human ways, someone shifting under the blankets with a groggy murmur, another pulling the hides tighter against their chin in a futile attempt to cling to the last pocket of warmth. And across the room, the fire, newly coaxed back to life, casts a soft amber glow that stretches across the floor in trembling ribbons of light, reminding you that even on the harshest morning the hearth remains the heart of the home. You take a few careful steps toward the fire, each one slow and deliberate to avoid slipping on the thin sheen of frost that has formed overnight across the boards. And as you approach the hearth, the shift in temperature is immediate, the faint heat brushing your shins and then your knees like the first warm breath of a waking animal. You crouch beside the flames, extending your hands toward the glow, and feel the stiffness in your fingers begin to ease, not fully, but enough that sensation returns in small tingling bursts that travel up your arms and settle behind your ribs. For a moment you simply stay there, letting the warmth soak into your palms, watching how the flames dance along the logs with greedy, eager tongues of gold and blue, and you think about how countless mornings like this have unfolded across the frontier, each one beginning, not with comfort or leisure, but with a quiet battle between cold and fire, between exhaustion and necessity, between the human will and the indifferent vastness of winter pressing against the walls outside. Your stomach growls softly, a reminder that warmth is only the first task of dawn, and as you rise from the hearth and move toward the small table where a pot and tin cups await, you feel the cold creeping back into your clothing, clinging to the shawl wrapped around your shoulders and nipping at your ankles like an animal unwilling to release its claim. You reach for the pot of water left near the embers overnight, testing it with your fingertips and finding it half frozen at the edges, requiring you to lift it close to the fire so the remaining ice can melt before you prepare the morning's first drink, a thin broth or a bitter splash of coffee that will warm the throat even if it does little for hunger. The first faint light of dawn slips through the cracks in the shuttered window, a thin blue-grey glow that spreads carefully across the room, revealing the outlines of sleeping forms, the rough grain of the wooden beams, and the ghost-like wisps of steam rising from the pot as the water finally begins to tremble with heat. You breathe in the mingled smells of smoke, damp wool, and warming metal, and you realize that, despite the cold, despite the aching joints, despite the relentless demands of a winter frontier morning, there is a strange comfort in this ritual, a rhythm repeated endlessly, a quiet affirmation that the cabin has survived another night, and that so have you. As the faint blue light of dawn strengthens behind the shuttered window, you wrap your arms more tightly around yourself and take the first slow, steady steps toward the door, feeling the cold rise from the floorboards like a living thing as you move across the cabin. And in that gradual approach you become aware of the familiar heaviness of morning tasks, weighing against the last remnants of warmth clinging to your skin. You pause only long enough to glance at the others still sleeping, faces half hidden beneath quilts, breaths rising in delicate puffs that mingle in the frigid air, and for a moment you envy the fragile comfort they still hold, knowing that once the door opens, the delicate bubble of heat in the room will collapse, and the day's true winter will begin. Your hand rests on the wooden latch, its surface cold enough to sting, and as you lift it you feel the faint tremor of the old hinges, struggling against the weight of frost sealing the door to its frame. With a low, reluctant groan, the door cracks open, and instantly the outside world surges inward in a sweeping rush of air, so brutally cold it feels like your breath has been snatched from your lungs. You blink against the shock, your face tightening as the wind nips your cheeks with 1,000 needle-like pricks, and for a long second you simply stand there, letting the reality of dawn settle into your bones. The world outside is transformed into a vast, endless expanse of white. Snow stretches in every direction, smooth and untouched except for the faint line of your boots from the night before, now half filled with drifting flakes. The light is sharp, almost metallic, glinting off the frozen landscape in a way that makes your eyes water. The silence is so profound that even your heartbeat seems louder, and the only movement comes from a few thin ribbons of smoke rising from nearby cabins, each one fighting a quiet battle against the icy sky. Your first breath of morning air burns your lungs, cold enough to make your ribs ache, and as you step forward into the snow, the surface crunches beneath your boots with a sound so crisp it echoes across the clearing. The cold reaches upward from the ground, wrapping around your ankles and creeping beneath your clothing like a determined spirit. And for a moment you recall the countless pioneers who described this very sensation, the feeling that winter was not just a season but a presence, patient and all-consuming. You make your way toward the small shed or barn, each step slower than the last as the snow reaches nearly to your knees and the wind lifts loose flakes to swirl around you in glittering spirals. Your hands, tucked beneath your shawl, throb with the dull ache of returning circulation, and you clench your fingers repeatedly to keep the numbness at bay. As you reach the barn door, frost clings to the latch like a skin of glass, and you brush it away with the back of your hand before tugging the door open just wide enough to slip inside. The sudden change in sound is startling. Outside the world was silent, but in here the animals greet you with soft movements, low snorts, and the warm, musky scent of hay and steam rising from their breath. Their bodies radiate a kind of heat that feels almost miraculous after the brutal cold outside, and as you close the door behind you, your shoulders relax involuntarily, grateful for even this modest shelter. Horses stamp gently against the packed straw, cows shift with slow, lumbering motions, and a few chickens tucked into corners rustle their feathers in sleepy confusion. You move quickly now, knowing the warmth here will fade if you linger too long. You break the ice that has formed over the water buckets, your knuckles stinging as cold droplets splash your skin, and you scoop fresh hay from the loft, its dry scent filling the air as it scatters over the animals' backs. Their steady chewing provides a comforting rhythm, a grounding reminder that life persists even through the harshest winter dawns. When the chores are done, you push the barn door open again and brace yourself for the cold. The shock is no less fierce than before, but this time you are ready, inhaling the frigid air with a determination that stiffens your spine. You retrace your steps toward the cabin, the wind tugging at your clothes, the snow crunching beneath your boots like brittle glass, and as you approach the door you see faint curls of smoke drifting from the chimney, a promise that the fire you left behind has grown stronger, warming the room for those still sleeping inside. The moment you step across the threshold, the cold clings to you like a second skin, but the interior warmth reaches for you in soft waves, easing the sting of winter from your fingers and cheeks. Someone is stirring a pot over the fire now, the fragrant steam rising into the air and filling the cabin with the smell of thawing broth or weak coffee. And as you remove your snow-covered shawl and hang it near the hearth, you feel that first deep breath of true morning settle comfortably in your chest. The day has begun, harsh and unforgiving as always, yet somehow softened by the simple rituals of survival, the tending of fire, the breaking of ice, the steady rhythm of breath shared among those who face the winter together. And as you sit for a moment near the hearth, warming your hands against the rising heat, you realize that this, too, is part of the strange, resilient beauty of life in the Wild West. Each morning carved from ice, each dawn earned inch by inch, each breath a quiet triumph over the cold that waits endlessly beyond the door. As you lower yourself onto the rough-hewn bench beside the fire, the warmth crawling slowly back into your limbs, you begin to feel the weight of the morning in a way that is both grounding and exhausting, a pull that settles deep in your bones as the cabin fills with the gentle murmurs of waking people and the faint, rhythmic pop of sap bursting inside the burning logs. The air is still cold enough to sting your nostrils when you inhale, but the fire has grown strong enough now to soften the worst edges of the chill, sending small waves of heat rolling outward until they reach your feet, thawing them in slow, almost painful tingles. Someone hands you a tin cup, perhaps of broth, perhaps weak coffee, perhaps little more than hot water, but the moment your fingers close around the warm metal, a sense of relief washes over you, so deep it almost feels like gratitude. Steam curls upward in thin, ghostly ribbons, carrying the faint scent of bitterness and smoke, and when you finally raise the cup to your lips, the heat spreads through your mouth and down your throat, with a soothing, almost medicinal promise, settling in your stomach like the first ember of real strength. Around you, others sit up in their straw ticks, rubbing their eyes, stretching stiff arms, and pulling quilts from their shoulders as reluctantly as wounded animals abandoning shelter. Their breaths linger in the air as pale clouds for a few seconds before dissolving into the warming room, and the sound of those breaths, slow, heavy, echoing in the wooden stillness, creates a peculiar comfort, a reminder that survival here is not a solitary act but a collective one, held together by proximity, fire, and the shared understanding that winter spares no one. Outside, through the narrow slits in the shutters, the first hints of real sunlight begin to appear, not strong enough to warm the world but bright enough to paint the snow in shades of pale gold and soft blue. The light reflects sharply off the drifts piled against the cabin walls, casting a shimmering glow into the room that catches on the frost melting from the rafters, and on the droplets forming at the ends of rough-hewn beams, as though the cabin itself is slowly waking from a long, icy sleep. Someone near the door begins preparing breakfast, if it can be called that, by scooping a handful of coarse oats into the pot of water now beginning to simmer. The scent of grain mixing with smoke drifts through the room in thin, comforting wisps, and though the meal will be plain and small, it is enough to stir a quiet gratitude inside you, a sense that warmth and nourishment, however meagre, are small victories against the cold that ruled the night. You watch as a wooden spoon circles through the bubbling mixture, the motion slow and deliberate, almost hypnotic, and the sound of the pot stirring blends with the gentle crackling of the fire to create a rhythm that feels older than the cabin itself. As the steaming oats thicken, the room fills with a soft hum of waking conversation, whispers about the cold in the night, a muttered complaint about stiff joints, a faint joke about the frost that seemed to creep into even the deepest layers of quilts. The voices are low and still tinged with sleep, but they create a kind of warmth that even the fire cannot match, a warmth born from shared hardship and the knowledge that the day ahead will demand patience, strength, and endurance from every person gathered here. You lift your cup again, savoring the last swallow of heat, and feel your body finally loosening, your muscles uncoiling from the tension they held through the night. For a brief, quiet moment, the cabin feels almost gentle, as though the walls have absorbed the collective breath of the people inside and turned it into a shield against the winter pressing beyond the door. Soon you will need to rise, to clear snow from the roof, to chop firewood, to tend to animals, to face the blinding cold and the biting wind. But for now, just for these few breaths, you hold still in the glow of the fire, the warmth settling into your chest like a quiet promise that even in the brutal winters of the Wild West, mornings can begin with something that feels almost like peace. As the warmth from the fire seeps slowly into your clothing and begins to unknot the stiffness in your shoulders, you lift your gaze toward the shuttered window and notice how the quality of light filtering through the thin cracks has shifted again. No longer the cold, distant blue of pre-dawn, but a faint, muted gold that signals the sun has finally crested the horizon, even if its rays remain too weak to soften the frozen plains outside. You can almost picture it rising beyond the mountains, its light spreading across the snow-covered landscape, like a pale wash of color over a blank canvas, touching fence posts, barns, and wagon tracks, with just enough brightness to convince your body that day has truly begun. The fire snaps sharply, as though punctuating that thought, and a thin trail of sparks spirals upward before dissolving into the dim air near the rafters. The smell of smoke mingles with the simmering aroma of oats, creating a scent that is both humble and strangely comforting, a reminder that breakfast here is less about taste and more about warmth, about filling stomachs enough to endure the long hours ahead. Someone ladles the thickening mixture into tin bowls, the muted clink of metal on metal echoing softly across the room, and when your own bowl is placed in your hands, the heat radiating from it feels like a small blessing pressed into your palms. You take a spoonful, the oats coarse and plain on your tongue, but the warmth spreads quickly through your chest and down into your belly, building a slow ember of strength from the inside out. Around you, others eat in a similar silence, spoons scraping lightly, breaths puffing faintly into the cool morning air. Occasional murmurs exchanged in voices still thick with sleep. The rhythm is familiar, almost ritualistic, born from generations of mornings lived in cabins like this one. Mornings where survival depended on rising before the cold could settle too deeply into the walls and into the bones of the people living within them. As you swallow another spoonful, you hear the distant groan of the cabin roof adjusting under the weight of accumulated snow, the sound deep and resonant like the shifting of an old ship in a frozen harbor. It's a reminder that before the sun climbs too high, the roof must be cleared, because too much weight can crush even the sturdiest of log homes, and winter in the Wild West offers no mercy to those who underestimate it. Your mind begins to sketch the tasks ahead, breaking ice from the water troughs, chopping enough firewood to last until nightfall, checking the fences that may have been buried or damaged by drifting snow. Yet for a moment, none of these responsibilities feel urgent. For a moment, the cabin holds you as gently as it can. You glance around the room and see faces beginning to sharpen with wakefulness. Eyes clearer, movement stronger, shoulders squaring against the cold they know they must soon meet. A child adjusts their shawl and tucks bare feet quickly into moccasins warmed overnight by the hearth. An older man pulls on his coat with a soft grunt, wincing as stiff joints resist the motion. A woman ties back her hair with fingers still pink from the icy air that seeped into the cabin when the door opened earlier. Outside, a faint wind hums against the walls, not yet fierce but carrying the unmistakable bite of winter, and you know it will grow stronger as the sun climbs higher. The shadows cast beneath the window shutters shift slightly as the morning brightens, stretching in long, thin lines across the floorboards and giving the room an illusion of depth, as if the light itself is pulling you gently toward the day. When you finally rise from your place near the fire, the heat slides from your body in the same instant, replaced by the icy kiss of the cabin's lingering cold. You tighten your coat, adjust the scarf around your neck, and step toward the door with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who knows they are about to cross a line between comfort and hardship. Your hand closes around the latch once more, its surface still biting cold despite the fire's efforts to warm the room. And as you pull the door open, the world outside unfurls in a burst of white light and crystalline air, so sharp and clean it almost hurts to breathe. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows across the snow, and the sky stretches out above you in a pale, frozen sweep that seems impossibly vast. For a brief moment you simply stand there, letting the cold settle around you, letting the brightness sting your eyes, letting the enormity of the day ahead press down on you like the weight of the snow on the cabin roof. Then, gathering what strength the morning has given you, you step out into the winter light, ready to carve another day from the frozen wilderness. As you step fully outside and let the cabin door fall shut behind you, the cold wraps around your body with a force so immediate and merciless that it almost feels alive, a presence that presses against your cheeks, slips under your collar, and tightens its grip around your ribs with every breath you draw, turning the simple act of inhaling into something sharp and metallic that makes the inside of your chest sting as though the air itself has teeth. The snow beneath your boots compresses with a deep crystalline crunch, the kind of sound that only comes from temperatures far below comfort, and each step sends a faint vibration up your legs, reminding you that the earth beneath this blanket of white is as hard as iron. Ahead of you, the path to the well or water source lies half erased by the night's drifting snow, a shallow indentation winding between frost-covered fence posts and the skeletal remains of summer brush, now buried beneath a wind-sculpted sheet of white. You pull your coat tighter around your body, feeling the stiffened fabric resist slightly where frost has begun to settle along the seams, and you lower your head against the wind, which sweeps in sudden gusts that scatter loose snow into swirling white ribbons, twisting across the frozen ground like restless spirits. The light of morning grows stronger with each step, yet does little to warm the landscape. Instead, it glints fiercely off the snow's untouched surface, forcing you to squint as you navigate the uneven drifts. The sky above is a pale, washed-out blue, thin and brittle, as though one hard gust might shatter it, and in the vastness of that sky you feel both small and strangely anchored, as if the cold has simplified the world into nothing more than breath, snow, sky, and survival. When you reach the well, the wooden frame is rimmed with ice, each plank sheathed in a glassy sheen that catches the light and sends it scattering in tiny flecks across your vision. The rope is stiff, frozen into rigid, twisted lines that creak loudly when you wrap your hands around it and begin to pull. Your fingers throb immediately from the contact, the cold biting through your gloves or mittens with startling speed, and for a moment you pause, rubbing your hands together to coax back a little warmth before continuing. The bucket rises slowly, its wooden slats encircled by a crust of frozen water that crackles quietly as it emerges into the air. When you finally set it down, the surface of the water inside is covered by a thin sheet of ice, a delicate lid you must punch through with the back of your knuckles, sending a shock of frigid droplets splashing onto your wrist. The cold burns, then numbs, and you grit your teeth against the sting, aware that everyone in the cabin depends on the small task you are performing now. As you begin your walk back, carrying the sloshing weight of the bucket carefully, so the icy water doesn't spill over your hands, the wind shifts again and sweeps across the open plain with a low, moaning sound. an eerie, hollow note that seems to echo off the distant hills and sink into the spaces between your heartbeats. It's a sound familiar to anyone who has lived through a frontier winter, a sound that reminds you that the world here is powerful and indifferent, a world where cold can carve its way into wood, stone, and flesh without hesitation. Your breath speckles the air in front of you in quick fading clouds, and with each exhale you feel the edges of fatigue tugging at your limbs, urging you to move faster before the water freezes solid again, before your fingers grow too numb to grip the handle, before the cold can lay its claim on you the way it has claimed so many before. By the time the cabin comes into view, its chimney releasing a thin plume of smoke that curls upward like a fragile thread against the winter sky, warmth becomes something you can almost taste, an imagined glow waiting behind the thick wooden door. And as you take the final steps across the snow-packed clearing, the heavy bucket swinging at your side, and your breath coming in small, sharp bursts, you understand with an almost reverent clarity that even the simplest dawn task in the Wild West winter is not just a chore but a quiet battle, fought inch by inch against a cold that never relents. When you finally cross the last few feet toward the cabin, the bucket heavy in your numb hand, and the cold woven so deeply into your clothes that the fabric feels stiff around your shoulders, you reach for the wooden latch with fingers that barely obey you, and as the door groans open on its frost-hardened hinges, a wave of warm, smoky air spills over your face with such gentle relief that for a brief moment you simply stand in the doorway, letting the contrast sink into your skin, thawing the sting along your jaw, and loosening the tight, shivery grip the wind has held on your breath since you stepped outside. Inside, the fire has strengthened, flames rising in confident arcs that snap against the logs with a bright, welcome energy. The warmth they cast is uneven, radiating strongly near the hearth and fading in thin, trembling bands as you move away from the fire. But after the sharp bite of the morning wind, even that uneven warmth feels like a blanket placed carefully over your senses. You step fully inside and close the door with your shoulder, feeling the cold trapped in your clothes sliding off you in slow, invisible layers. The others look up as you enter, their faces flushed from the hearth's heat, and without a word someone stands to help you with the bucket, knowing how the cold clings viciously to the metal handle, and how your fingers must be screaming beneath their numbness. When you finally release your grip, your hands throb with a deep, aching sensation that moves through your knuckles like slow lightning. Painful, yes, but a familiar reminder that warmth is returning, that blood is moving again, that you made it inside before the cold could settle too deeply. The bucket is carried to the hearth, where it's placed beside the coals to warm. Almost immediately, thin tendrils of steam begin rising from the water's surface, lifting through the room in curling wisps that glow faintly in the firelight. The scent of warming iron mixes with the wood smoke, creating an aroma that feels oddly grounding, a smell tied to countless winter mornings across countless cabins just like this one. You move closer to the hearth and extend your hands over the fire, palms hovering above the heat until you feel the sting of thawing fingertips, first sharp, then spreading into a dull ache, then slowly fading into a heavy, pleasant warmth. The fire crackles and pops, resin bursting from the logs in tiny sparks that drift upward before vanishing into the rafters, and the rhythmic sound of the flames settling against the wood becomes a steady background heartbeat marking the beginning of the day. Someone begins distributing the last of the morning's oats into bowls, the thick mixture simmering slowly in the pot beside the bucket. The steam from the pot fogs the air in a soft veil, catching the light as it swirls upward, and even the simplest scent of hot grain feels like nourishment after the cold that seeped into your bones. A bowl is placed in your hands, not as hot as the bucket's metal was cold, but warm enough to settle the tremble still lingering in your fingertips, and you lift it carefully to your mouth, letting the first spoonful slip across your tongue with the satisfying weight of something that promises strength for the hours ahead. As you eat, the room shifts around you in small, purposeful motions. Someone shaking frost from a coat hung overnight on a peg near the fire, someone else stamping their boots near the door to loosen the snow packed between the leather seams, a child wrapping a scarf around their neck with a stubborn determination to make the wool sit just right. Each person moves with the quiet focus of someone readying themselves for a day shaped not by choice but by necessity. And in their movements you recognize the familiar unspoken understanding of frontier life. Sleep ends when the fire must be tended, when the animals need feeding, when the world outside demands attention no matter how cold the air may be. The frost that clings to the rafters above glitters faintly in the newly strengthened light, small droplets beginning to form at their edges and fall in cold taps onto the floor below. The cabin walls, still holding the memory of the night's cold, creak softly as they expand in the fire's growing heat, a reminder that even wood has its limits in the deep winter. And though the room is warming, though the fire burns strong, though bowls of steaming oats pass from hand to hand, you can feel winter still lurking at the edges, waiting patiently beyond the door. But for now, with warmth soaking into your palms, breath rising steadily into the softened air, and the first real light of morning filtering through the shutters in thin golden bands, you allow yourself a moment of quiet satisfaction, a moment in which survival feels not heroic but simply human, not grand but deeply, undeniably real. And when the last spoonful of warm oats has been scraped from the tin bowl and the fire has settled into a steady, confident burn, you rise from your place beside the hearth with a slow exhale, feeling the heavy winter layers waiting for you like old companions. Stiff coat, woolen scarf, leather gloves that still hold the faint bite of yesterday's cold. One by one you pull them on, each piece sealing you more tightly against the world outside, each knot and clasp a reminder that comfort is fleeting here, and that warmth must be carried, protected and earned moment by moment. Around you the cabin moves in its quiet morning rhythm. The child tugs on their boots with clumsy determination. The older man shoulders his axe, testing its weight with practiced ease. A woman wraps another quilt around the youngest sleeper before rising. And every person, no matter their age or duty, glances once more at the fire, at the heart of the home, before stepping away from it and toward the door, knowing that they will return to it only when the day's tasks have been met. You reach the threshold last, placing your hand on the wooden latch that has grown cold again despite the fire's best efforts. For a brief moment you hesitate, listening to the soft breathing behind you, the crackle of the flames, the whisper of melting frost dripping from the rafters, small, tender sounds that feel almost fragile compared to the harsh silence waiting outside. Then, with a steady breath, you lift the latch and pull the door open. The winter light floods in, bright, sharp, unfiltered, spreading across the wooden floor like a blade of white fire. The cold follows immediately, rushing over your boots and prickling your skin even through the layers you wear, but this time you do not flinch. You step into it with the steady resolve of someone who has survived another night, who understands the rhythm of this land, who accepts the cold not as an enemy but as a constant truth. Behind you, the door closes with a dull thud, sealing the warmth inside for those who remain. Before you, the vast white world stretches in every direction, silent, endless, and waiting. Your breath rises in a slow plume, drifting skyward like a small offering to the frozen morning. Your boots sink into the snow with a satisfying, determined crunch. Your body, still remembering the fire's glow, braces for the day ahead. And as you walk into the Wild West winter, toward the animals, the woodpile, the long hours of labor beneath a pale and distant sun, you realize that sleep here is not just a nightly refuge but a quiet triumph, a fragile victory earned through endurance, closeness, firelight, and the stubborn will to rise again. In this place, in this season, survival is a story told one night at a time. And today, as the cold wind curls around you and the sky brightens inch by inch, you begin the next chapter, steady, breath by breath, carrying the fragile warmth of the cabin into the vast, unrelenting white. And so, as you take those first steady steps across the frozen clearing, the snow crunching beneath your boots in slow, rhythmic pulses that echo the beat of your own determined breath. You feel the full weight of the morning settle around you, not as a burden, but as a quiet acknowledgement of everything you have endured since the world went dark the night before. The cabin behind you stands solid and warm, its chimney releasing a thin trail of smoke that curls upward into the pale morning sky, like a fragile thread binding you to the small refuge you've just left. And even though the cold bites fiercely at your cheeks and settles deep into your clothing, there is a steadiness in your stride that grows with every step you take. The sun, still low on the horizon, casts long blue shadows across the snow, painting the ground in cold but beautiful colors that shimmer faintly beneath the weak winter light. The air is so crisp it rings in your ears, so clean it feels almost sharp, and as you inhale it slowly, deeply, letting it fill your lungs with that strange mix of pain and clarity only frontier winters can offer, you realize that the day ahead, harsh as it may be, is simply another part of the endless cycle that has shaped life here for generations. Behind you, the faint glow of the hearth still lingers in your memory, a soft orange warmth that seems to hover just at the edge of your thoughts, like a promise waiting for dusk. And though the cold presses harder now, curling around your legs and seeping into your sleeves, you carry that warmth with you in a quiet, stubborn way. Every frontier soul knows that survival in winter is not about conquering the cold but about outlasting it, meeting it each morning with the same steady resolve and returning each night to the fire that makes the next dawn possible. And as you pause for a moment, looking out across the wide white horizon where sky and earth blur together in a soft line of frost and sun, you feel something settle inside you, a quiet, enduring truth that comes only to those who have faced nights like this one. You made it through the dark. You made it through the cold. You rose with the light. And now, wrapped in the pale glow of morning, with the snow stretching endlessly before you and the warmth of the cabin waiting for your return, you begin the slow, determined walk into the heart of the day, knowing that tonight, when the fire crackles again and the hides grow warm under your hands, you will carve one more night of rest from the frozen silence of the Wild West winter. This is the end of the Night Seps story, but only the beginning of the Day Sips.